St. Luke is obviously drawing a parallel not only between John and Jesus in his opening chapters, but Mary and Zechariah.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
and I think you give like 5 parallels.
Yeah, that's right.
There's quite a few, and it was
that's right.
Beautiful parallels.
Yeah. So the angel appears to Zechariah just like he appeared to Our Lady, and gives him the Annunciation about what's going to happen. And Zechariah, as soon as he hears, this is really fascinating, as soon as he hears that his name will be John, after that he starts saying, well, how shall I know this is going to happen? So he's got an angel appearing to him in the temple, and he's still he doubts. And it makes you wonder, what's the origin of that doubt? The reason why we doubt things is that we don't see, even when there's an explicit revelation of miracles happening, is because we don't want it to be true.
We don't want it to be true.
So Zechariah seems to have had some reason why he didn't want something to be true. And my read is he didn't want the name to be John.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be Zechariah, right? I mean, it's like Junior, right?
Yeah, right. And the people, Zechariah's relatives, they all were convinced that he was going to be named Zechariah.
Yes.
Which at first you think, oh, well, everyone names their first son. No, when you look at the lineages in Scripture, it's not common at all. So he must have
been telling people
if I ever have a son, he's going to be named Zechariah, and he's going to be just like Dad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think he had this idea of he was going to somehow be the primary formator. His mini-me was going to be John.
Yeah.
To put it in modern terms.
Yeah.
And then the angel's like, his name's going to be John. And so Zechariah's like, well, how shall I know this will happen? And so he asks a question prompted by a certain doubt, and the doubt is because there's something he didn't want to be true, And then, of course, the angel says, well, since you don't believe me, it's going to happen anyway. But because you didn't believe me, you're not worthy to hear anything else, so you go deaf. And you're not worthy of teaching anyone, you go dumb. So he goes speechless and deaf, okay?
Yeah.
And he comes out, he can't tell anyone what happens. And then he just sort of sits in contemplative silence, thinking about what he's done. Just like put him to the teacher, send him to the corner. Now I want you to think about what you've done. So that's what happens. He's there for 9 months, but dutifully he goes and has relations with his wife. And the angel says, you got to do this. That's what he does. Sure enough, his wife conceives. Sure enough, John is conceived. John is born, and it's time to name him. And all the relatives okay, his name's going to be Zechariah, like his dad. And Elizabeth had also received some kind of revelation. We don't know when that happened, but she did. And she says, nope, his name's John. And now mothers in the Old Testament, had every right to name their sons. That happens on a number of occasions in the Old Testament. Joseph the patriarch was named by his mother,
right. Yeah. By the way, my wife always jokes, they bring the birth certificate in at the delivery rooms whenever the dad leaves to go get lunch. They bring the birth certificate in so mom actually gets to choose the name.
Oh, how funny.
They do. They really do that.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So it's still happening.
It's still happening today. Right, exactly. So you would think at that point, the relatives would relent, but they're like, no. And they go to Zachary and they want him to write it out.
Right.
Because they're so convinced that he wanted the name to be Zechariah.
Yeah.
And then it's only at the moment he says his name is John, his tongue is loosed, he can hear. So it's that's the moment. And that tells you that was the thing that had to happen for Zechariah. He had to come to terms with the fact that his son was not going to be made in his image, but in God's image.
Yeah.
His son's name meant the grace of God, So
it has to have some beautiful imagery there because he lost his voice, and yet John was the voice.
Yeah, he regained his voice. Oh. I think it was Augustine who said at one point, he says, John proclaimed his name and a voice was born.
Wow.
Just a fascinating, sort of that parallel between the rebirth of Zechariah's voice and John's name and his birth, So anyway.
Just one of the things that you say there is that John is born of old parents, and that's the old order, the Old Testament passing away. And Jesus is born of a young virgin, and the new order coming in. It's just, the parallels are remarkable. You give, actually, I'm just going to pull this up because on page 17, you actually list so many parallels, and I just think that they're just so many. Let's see. There's an Annunciation to Zechariah, followed by Annunciation to Mary, both by Gabriel.
Yep.
Both Zechariah and Mary ask a question. Both receive an answer, which includes a sign about Elizabeth conceiving. So they both talked about Elizabeth. She's in the middle of both.
Yep.
You know, both go to Zechariah's house to visit Elizabeth. Both end up with a canticle of praise to God. Mm-hmm. There are 5 parallels. So it's obvious that St. Luke wanted us to compare Mary and Zechariah. It's just so good.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.